Okay, I have a couple of thoughts this morning. All the AI activity is having me think through some of the models of the way that the human mind works and consciousness and intelligence, learning, etc. And the reflection on what it is that's challenging for us to understand. Like, there's something here that appears that what we're starting to notice is ChatGPT and other large language model research shows us there's a much simpler, in a way, simple, basic design principle that allows intelligence to arise or emerge. The challenge with what it is that I think we really want to understand here, right? Is we have this capacity in us. We have this capacity to do something really profound and amazing. And I expect that this next transition period is going to be harder for us than it needs to be. The challenge has a lot to do with the fact that we're programmed not to have these kind of major updates on an ongoing basis. These happen in stages, and this is where, for those of you who know who Nora Bateson is, and Nora Bateson recently, in the past year, maybe 2 years now, um, made the bold claim that stage theories are um, colonial in nature, uh, and have a very um, she used a different word. It's like it's akin to eugenics, right? I mean, so she should know. Her grandfather was the one who coined the term genetics, and he spent his whole life. This is William Bateson. Spent his whole life um, after that point trying to persuade other well-meaning people that eugenics was a bad idea. Using our knowledge of genetics to try to create that better human was a bad idea. And I think this is an important distinction. And I think that she's actually right, and that William Bateson was actually right in that. Um, but I think that stating that stage theories are inherently eugenic in nature, there it is a little more tangled than that and challenging to disentangle it. I want to use a couple of very simple metaphors to understand why it is that I think this. And the simplest metaphor is a movie that you may or may not have seen. If you have kids, you almost certainly have, which is Pixar's movie Inside Out. Um, Inside Out is, if you don't know, I'm not going to spoil the whole thing, but it's important to watch, I think, for the metaphorical reasoning of this and the simplified nature of it. It is clearly a vastly oversimplified model of what happens. It's not a scientific model of what happens, but there's enough there that I think is close enough to the money that it gives us an insight. The insights are helpful, and we can it will help. I think children and adults alike be able to think about how our consciousness, how our meaning making system works. Um, just to give a basic overview, there's a couple of highlights that I'll focus on particularly. The story of Inside Out follows a little girl named Riley, whose mother and father move from Minnesota, where she has learned to play soccer and hockey, and has a lot of friends, to San Francisco for her father's job. She is going through a lot of the stresses of change right around the time that she's about to go through puberty. So there's two things happening at the same time. Her world is overturned. Her perfect world of all things that work in, she has working um, she's pretty much solved life in Minnesota. She has friends, hockey, family, studies. She just has all of these internal aspects that make sense. And transplanted into San Francisco, many of those things are challenged. In the movie, the way that the challenge happens is the internal world of these islands of personality that she depends on no longer function because they no longer fit the context that she's in. The no longer fitting the context is only partly because of the transplanting. It's also because she's at a point where this is a natural time to transplant. So the movie really sets us up for something beautiful. What most people may pay attention to only minorly, but it really caught my attention at a deep level, was that at the point that she actually collapses, actually accepts that the existing models are not really functional, and she's going to have to get let go of them. You effectively watch her go through the stages of grief internally. And once she actually does collapse and sadness is allowed to dominate because the old way of being is not salvageable, the islands of personality collapse. Sadness is seen to be affecting the long-term memories and the core memories in a way that her sense of joy, the joy character, is upset about, right? Joy is trying to defend, trying to control whether or not sadness can have that impact or not. And sadness can't help it, right? So when the islands of personality collapse and she's basically non-functional because all of the patterns of knowing how to behave are failing her, something happens in that the way that her parents see the distress that she's in and the way that the care is reestablished has something rebooting, right? There's something like joy inside. The controller, joy is the controller in the movie. Joy as the controller allows for the change to happen. And at the point that the change is allowed, at the point that the internal board of directors says, oh, clearly we can no longer salvage the existing master plan of our internal consciousness and how we orient the world. At that point, um, if you notice, if you remember the movie, it kind of comes about with anger being the kind of final thing. The anger has an idea of running away back to home. It's the last ditch effort to salvage the old way of knowing. It can't actually work, but from anger's perspective, better than this than nothing. I'm not just going to sit by and watch our world go to hell. I'm going to make something. I'm going to attempt to create a pathway, a bridge back to the last place that things worked out. And in the movie, stealing mom's credit card. I said spoiler alert. So stealing mom's credit card and getting on the Greyhound bus to ride the bus back was the way to do that. But there's something that in that moment of what the hell am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm way out of my depth. These are, I know I bought a ticket. I'm getting on the bus, but still, from Riley's perspective, it's like, what's next? I have no idea what the next thing is. In a sense, I've already abandoned everything that I know, right? I'm already abandoning family. I'm abandoning the many of the things that I know how to do. And so there's something of a surrender to allowing the collapse to happen. And once the collapse is allowed to happen, the internal body is system, the knowledge beyond. So this is the thing that's really interesting. This isn't Riley making the decision. It's not even the primary emotions that are guiding her daily behavior. This is some, we don't know, invisible intelligence that knows it's time to upgrade the dashboard. Where did that dashboard come from? Like she anger broke the old one by inserting an idea that wasn't going to work. This Nora Bateson calls this the double bind, right? Damned if I do, damned if I don't. If I stay in San Francisco with my family, I no longer have the functions that I need. If I go to, if I run back to Minnesota away from my family, then I'm damned because I'm not going to be able to live on my own by that. I'm foregoing my family, which is the source of my need to get along right now. Now, this is specific to Riley and her situation. Some kids running away is the choice that they make. But if I do this with, if I look at Riley's situation as that double bind, damned if I do, damned if I don't, can't stay, can't go, the collapse of, okay, I can't do that. Nora Bateson says, when we're in a double bind, thing to do is add context. And the adding the context, widening the window, what are the possible avenues? What are the things that I haven't considered because my model of the world constrains my view of what's possible to a degree that is usually functional and is now no longer functional. I need to find a way to go beyond that. So something happens where the control panel, the old one that the anger broke, gets replaced by a new control panel. And you notice a couple of things, right? There are controls that allow more than one emotion to drive at a time. Ah, this is interesting because if you actually notice the scene where Riley is arguing with her parents and her father puts his foot down and sends her to the bedroom, both of the parents have all five emotions sitting at the control panel at the same time. Evidently, the mode that Riley is going through, this ability to deal with the complexity of anger disagrees with joy in a violent in a strong enough way that they can't find a compromise. Okay, Joy, you drive this time. That was the motion, and up to this point, Joy, the controller, was always allowed to dictate what it was that needed to be done. Sadness now said, hey, Joy, I can't be vetoed here. Something that needs to be expressed that's deeper than what you and I normally have looked at. And I can't be quiet about it. I have to voice my opposition to the control plan that you have. And anger does as well. You can see each of the emotions going through that at the point that there is basically a collapse of coherence or unanimity between the voices, between an actual um, majority opinion about how they should be able to survive. That whole collapses. And now they're learning to drive with two distinct, strong emotions blended together. This is very akin to the way that your vision works to give you stereo vision, right? This is very similar to the way that the eyes work to give you stereo vision. If you look through one eye, you'll notice that you see this basic same world, except you'll notice if you try to navigate, if you've ever tried to drive with one eye, there's a challenge. Um, there's some piece of information that's missing, and that's depth perception. When you use both eyes, there's something that's really odd. It does two very key things at the front. There's lots of stuff that's going on, but one is it's doing error correction. There's one eye may have a little bit of blur, a little bit something, see something different than the other eye, and they can negotiate what those things are. They can agree, on what's happening in the world and how that works. The other thing that they do is the slight difference because they're not coming from the exact same perspective. They're a slightly different perspective, but very close together, allows for an inference of an imagined world that includes a dimensionality. That isn't given by either eye alone. We have something like we can learn to have some sense of depth. People with only one eye learn to negotiate the world. I'd be curious to see how well that works. But there's an efficiency that happens when both eyes are doing that. And so two emotions driving at the same time gives a different perspectival awareness, allows the triangulation, even though it's very small, it's an interesting triangulation. We are using that to maximum advantage to do very strong depth perception. Like I said, people with only one eye have a reasonable facsimile of depth perception, but I bet that if you put them on the soccer field or in some sports where the need for very acute depth perception for ball projection and prediction of path and all of that would be very difficult, right? It's why soldiers and especially fighter pilots need to have perfect vision, both eyes, because they use that to an incredible degree. The same thing is true with our emotions. But the first thing we do is we build up a model for the more simplified. Let's learn the world doing one emotion at a time. This is kind of like learning basic arithmetic before you learn long division and then algebra and calculus and trigonometry and all that stuff. So there's an aspect of learning that is distinct in the way that we learn through the stages, right? Simplified at first. The simplified model falls away and a more complex model can be born. It allows us to be able to ramp up the depth of maps that we have. This took a little longer to go through than I wanted it to. The next video, I will talk about why this progressive model through building up a map and then destroying that map or composting that map, reusing it, but with fast upgrades is something that we do. And I'm going to use the word upgrades because we think of this from software, but I don't think this is a good way to think of it. It's not like an upgrade. This is inherent built in. The upgrade could happen anytime and it could happen progressively. There's a pattern in our culture that has things that rise this way. And in our species, other animals have a different way of doing this as well. Okay, so let's pause there, come back and look at why do maps formulate, concretize in a way that needs to be dissolved and reformulated later. And why is that a challenging process?